Hello, and welcome back to Awakening to Your Story TV, the place to learn, get inspired, and be supported with heart-centered solutions for your everyday life. I'm your host, Alicia Hartzell, and today we are going to be adding to your emotional tool library with boundaries. Now, as a side note, before we get started, I want to talk to anybody who's trying to create boundaries as a parent or as a loved one for a kid. While the principles we talk about today are going to be the same, it's a little nuanced because if you're a parent or a loved one creating boundaries, you're creating boundaries for yourself, but you're also using your parental authority to create boundaries for the kids. And so there's a little bit of a different nuanced experience there. Principles are the same, so stick with me. As always, you can find the link below for the blog that goes along with this, so you can read along or get any extra tools that you may need. Okay, so let's start with creating an emotional boundary. Now, this may surprise you, but an emotional boundary is an action that you are willing to take to protect your inner alignment and well-being. Now, I know often we don't think of boundaries as an action, but it is. It's an action that you're willing to create to keep yourself in that place where you feel good and you're in your own consciousness and ready to live your life, right? Ready to experience and participate. Now, when creating a boundary, the focus is always going to be on your heart and your story, right? So I want you to think about creating a boundary by first focusing on your heart, right? On your emotional heart and well-being. Ask yourself, who do I want to be in this situation? And how do I want to feel in this situation? And then decide what actions you're willing to take to maintain and hold that place of alignment for yourself, right? Now, there are two missteps that happen when we try this, right? The first one is thinking that it's the other person's responsibility to have an action that keeps us in a state of alignment, right? Anytime you say, do this so that I feel, that's actually a codependent dialogue. And unfortunately, it leaves all the power for how you feel in the other person's hands, right? That's not creating a boundary. When we are focused on the other person and how we want them to change for us so that we can be in our place of alignment, it doesn't work because that person may not be able to hold that boundary for you. It's not their job. It's not their job to take action so that you feel better. It's your job to know what action you're willing to take so that you feel better, right? Now, another misstep that often happens, and I've been in a place where I have done this too, is trying to create a boundary that proves someone's wrongness, if wrongness is even a word, right? We create these statements like, you can't treat me this way. You're wrong. You must change, right? We're focused on the other person and how wrong they are. And we assume that that is a boundary. But pointing out someone else's wrongness, flaws, inability to do what we need doesn't create a boundary, right? So I go back to this idea, right? A healthy boundary starts with your heart and your story. It starts with you knowing who you want to be and how you want to feel in a given situation, and then knowing what action you're willing to take to protect that feeling, right? Okay. Now, we're going to talk about how to communicate a boundary. And after that, I'm going to give you some examples so that you can really see how a healthy boundary comes to life. But when we talk about communicating boundaries, right? Communicating your boundary is a beautiful way to express yourself. And it gives the other person an opportunity to respond and build a different kind of dynamic. And it can be a very powerful place to have dialogue, right? But when you're communicating your boundary, be careful to not put the action on the other person, and be careful not to allow the other person to change the action you're willing to take, right? Because it really is about allowing yourself permission to have those actions at hand amongst the relationship to keep you in a state of well-being, to keep you emotionally sound, right? Now, another thing to keep in mind when you're communicating is the other person's emotional capacity, right? If a person does not have the emotional capacity to respect, process, have a conversation about your boundary, then you don't actually have to tell them. Your boundary is not for them. Your boundary is for you, right? So you have a choice. You don't actually have to participate in a dialogue with that person. You just have to know what you're willing to do to stay sound and in that place of well-being for yourself, right? Okay, now let's give you some examples so that you can really see how they come to life. First, we're going to talk about a communicated boundary. I have a good friend of mine who I love dearly, and they were going through a very challenging time and transition in their life. And during this transition, I was happy to lend an ear. We talked all the time, and I am a supportive person. I love giving heart-centered solutions. So I, was there to be a witness to what they were experiencing and also offer help as they tried to navigate through, because they were asking for it. The problem is that they weren't taking it. And the friendship started to feel like it was very one-sided. There was no reciprocal participation. And I started to feel like I was being taken advantage of. And I didn't feel good. When I saw their name come up on my phone, I had that sinking feeling. And I knew, because of how I felt, that I needed a boundary. And so I decided to kind of look inward, right? Who do I want to be and how do I want to feel? And then what actions am I willing to take to do that? Now, I wanted to feel like a loving friend. I wanted to feel like a full expression of myself, right? I wanted to feel like I wasn't being taken advantage of. So that helped me create language for feeling safe and sound and like we were in a dialogue together, right? So I decided, because I knew that this person's emotional capacity was broad enough, that it was a safe place to have a conversation about it. And I just said to them, listen, I love you, and I am so sorry you're going through what you're going through. I feel like I've been a really good sounding board for you, but it is starting to feel like I'm being taken advantage of. And so I'm going to have to exit conversations around this particular topic, because I don't want to feel taken advantage of by you. And I want us to feel like we are still in a good friendship. And I want to feel good when I talk to you. And to do that, I have to curb what we talk about. And they completely understood. And the really great thing was they then said, well, can I pay for your time And can I have a session with you and talk about that specific thing? And I was like, well, sure. Because in that state, right, I was willing to just curb the conversation. But in that part of the conversation that we were having about my boundary, they saw my boundary and they said, okay, well, I still want to talk to you about that. How can I do that and still make you feel not taken advantage of? Having a session is perfect, right? So that's what we did. But it was my job to hold that boundary, right? So when we were participating in dialogue, it wasn't her job to keep an eye on the conversation and where it went. It was my job to go, oh, you know what? We're veering into that topic. So why don't we schedule a session for that and let's talk about something else, right? As a friend, right? And it worked and it was brilliant and we both felt good. We communicated and it was amazing. It deepened our friendship. It deepened my, state of alignment and strength within myself, right? Now let's talk about a non-communicated boundary, because sometimes those feel a little bit more tricky, right? Because we like that validation of having conversation about the boundary. I have another person in my life who I love very dearly, and they're not going anywhere, right? They're in my life forever. The problem is that they tend to have a kind of one-upping sort of way of communicating, belittling. There's a lot of gaslighting that happens, and it's not over time I have come to understand that in this relationship, all of those things are a way of self-preservation for them. And so I know not to take it personally, but to be in dialogue with them, I have to have boundaries for myself. Otherwise, I get triggered and pulled into and diminished by some of the things that this person may say, right? And so I created a boundary for myself. I turned inward, I looked in my heart, and I was like, who do you want to be in this relationship? And how do you want to feel, right? I want to be somebody who loves unconditionally. I want to be somebody who is also grounded in who I am and has the ability to stand in my own power and not feel triggered by this person's self-preservation. So I want to feel, right, like a full expression of myself. I want to feel grounded. I want to be a place of unconditional love, right? So love that does not have condition on how they show up. They get to show up however they are, and there's still love and appreciation for them, right? So I created a boundary and an action that says, if that person starts to pull into any of those kinds of places, I will gently shift the conversation or end the conversation, right? Not in a way that tries to prove how wrong they are. I don't need to do that. It's not about them. They're not going to be able to participate anyway. I can gently just shift the conversation, or I can gently end the conversation, right? I can also not tell them things that are really sensitive and deep within me. They just don't have access to those parts because they can't keep it sacred, right? They can't keep it safe. And so that's my boundary. My boundary is shifting the action, right? Shifting dialogue, ending dialogue, and then not communicating things that are so close to my heart, right? That's my boundary. And I don't have to communicate it to them. And what happens is it allows me the power to feel safe, a full expression of myself and an unconditionally loving person in that experience, right? It gives me back my power because I'm not focused on them doing something that they're not going to be capable of doing to make me feel like I have a state of well-being, right? Okay. Remember, you have the power to create a boundary, whether you communicate it or not. Look inward. Who do you want to be? How do you want to feel? And what actions are you willing to take to step into and maintain that place of inner alignment and well-being? That's how you create a boundary, right? Now, boundaries shift and change and are nuanced. And if you need help creating a boundary or understanding how to create a boundary for your specific information, I'll meet you in the comments. I'm here to help in any way that I can. Go over and read the blog. It'll help you really solidify these ideas for yourself and really create ownership for this emotional tool that is so valuable in keeping your inner alignment safe and your power, personal power and well-being like intact. I'm here to help in any way I can. Like and share the video, subscribe to my channel. Just know that I am here supporting you and holding you in a place where you have the power to create and maintain a boundary and really step in to a place of inner well-being.